Hello and welcome back to Bookish and welcome to Tag Tuesday. The tag I'm doing today is the Hindsight Is 2020 Reader Tag. This tag, I was tagged to do this by Steve Donoghue. Thanks Steve for the tag. I think the prompts on this one are really interesting. I'll talk about why in just a minute. The tag was created by the channel Erin Go Read. So I'll leave a link to that channel down below as well. And essentially what this tag is all about is kind of getting to the heart, or getting you to talk about how you developed, I think, as a reader, is really kind of what we're looking at. And what kind of a reader were you? What kind of a reader have you become? You know, what do you think reading does for you? There are only 6 prompts, but I think a lot of them will require some extra talking. I'm looking forward to it. So prompt number 1, I have, again, prompts on my phone. And number 1, what were you like as an early learning reader? I was a rereader. I don't know how unusual this is, but I became kind of obsessed with certain books, you know, and now when I'm talking about these books as a kid, I'm talking about, you know, picture books, hardbacked picture books. I became obsessed with just a few, you know, titles, and I just read them over and over again, and I studied and pored over the pictures, and, you know, where I could probably have recited the books if I wanted to, but I just read them over and over again. And then when I, you know, graduated to, I guess what today we'd call chapter books, kind of short chapter books written for children, I was the same way. I've talked about the book Call It Courage, which is kind of a Polynesian boy gets trapped on an island all by himself and has to figure out how to survive. When I graduated and started reading that book and books like that, I read them over and over again. I have no idea how many times I read Call It Courage when I was a kid, but it was only about, I think, 90 pages, and so it could be read relatively quickly. I reread that book in that way. Then as I got a little older, I started reading, I've talked about this before, I read the Chronicles of Narnia, and I read my favorites from that series books over and over again, which was essentially what at the time were numbered books 1 through 5, and that would be The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, The Silver Chair, and The Horse and His Boy. I read those books essentially to the point where I knew exactly what was going to happen, and I read them several times. And then I've mentioned on this channel several times before that then I became obsessed with Lord of the Rings in the 5th grade, and I reread those books, I don't know, a dozen times between 5th grade and graduating from high school. I was kind of an obsessive rereader, which really limited, you know, what I read, but I felt like I was, or it seemed like I was reading quite a bit of the time. Prompt number 2 is, what book or series really got you excited about reading as a kid? Okay, so I had a subscription. I don't know who paid for it. I guess my parents. We had a subscription to the Children's Book of the Month Club. And so every month I got a new hardback picture book. As a kid, I had an aunt who gave me books every year for my birthday, whether I wanted them or not, and oftentimes I didn't. But, you know, those books coming every month kind of, you know, I think addicted me to the idea of getting new books and thinking about books as kind of a present. So in a sense, that kind of got me excited about reading because it made books seem special and like a gift. Probably the first books that really, I guess, got me into reading that I haven't mentioned before were the Hardy Boy books. My grandmother had a fairly complete set of the Hardy Boy books that had belonged to my uncles when they were kids in the, I guess, in the late 50s, early 60s. And so I read those over and over again, and I probably, there were probably, I don't know, 20 or 21 of those books that she had. I don't know if that's a complete set or not, but a lot of those books, and they were numbered, and I read them over and over again. They had those cool kind of woodcut pictures in them, and they were relatively easy to read, and they were excitable. I was so into the Hardy Boys that around, I think, when I was when I was 11, my birthday party was a Hardy Boys themed birthday party, and I was one of those kids who, you know, went around solving mysteries in my neighborhood that didn't exactly actually exist because of the Hardy Boys. So, you know, to give you to talk about a series of books that I haven't mentioned before, you know, along with the others I mentioned in prompt 1, the Hardy Boys probably were as important as anything else. Prompt number 3, has there been a person in your life, real or fictional, who has inspired you to be a reader? And the answer to that is yes. Over and over again in every stage of my life, people have influenced me, encouraged me to be readers, and changed the way I read. My grandmother on my mother's side had books for us to read. I have inherited one of those books. This is a book from what was called the Home University bookshelf. This is volume 6, Famous Stories in Verse. And it has literally a book of short stories and poetry. And I think the thing I liked about it most was it has these cool color plates that look like old-timey illustrations and paintings, and I was obsessed with looking at those. These are actually some of the first books I remember looking through as a kid. My mother, by the way, my grandmother on my mother's side was an English teacher. My mother, an high school English teacher, and she encouraged me to read. She bought me the Lord of the Rings box set paperback books, which I still have, which are in incredibly fragile condition because I reread them so often, which really inspired me and got me into reading fantasy literature. Her favorite author was Mark Twain, so that kind of was an introduction into reading American literature. My dad is an amateur Civil War historian and has been my whole life, and he had these big American heritage books of the history of the American Revolution and the Civil War with pictures and maps, and I was obsessed with looking at those. And then, as a relatively far too young reader, I read his collection of the Bruce Catton Civil War history, so his 3-volume Civil War history. I read those, so he inspired me to read history. When I went to college, my best friend in college, whose name was Rick, was already well versed in kind of American classic authors, particularly Hemingway and Faulkner. And kind of because of his influence and him talking about these books and authors, I kind of threw myself into reading them. And I think you can always kind of tell how obsessed I became with reading these classic works, I guess, of American 20th century literature, because the paperback volumes I have oftentimes indicate that I bought them relatively quickly and close together. These are the first 4 Faulkner books I bought. As I Lay Dying, The Sound of the Fury, Absalom, and Sanctuary. And then I switched over to the vintage. I don't know if you can see them, but they're back there in the second from the top. They're vintage black-spined paperbacks, or almost all the other Faulkner books I had. And, these series stayed around for a while, but I promise you I bought these books, within months of one another. Probably my Hemingway books are even a better example of how close together I bought them all. These are essentially all of my Hemingway, almost all of my Hemingway novels. They're Collier paperback books from Scribner's, and they all have this kind of jazz age, kind of black spine and different font used. And I probably read most of these Hemingway novels in a year. Most of these Hemingway books I read within a single year, and I bought one after the other as I had money in college and shortly afterward to read them. So there's that, and then BookTube, all of you influenced my reading. This month in January, I'm literally devoted to reading books that I saw on other people's channels, or books that other people had recommended. And it's just been a great reading month because of that. So, that doesn't go away. People inspire me to read still, and always have since I was a little boy. Prompt number 4, at what point did you begin to identify as a reader? And that would be kind of near the end of my first semester in college. That's when I really got into reading Hemingway and Faulkner, and kind of spent my entire Christmas holidays reading those books. And that was when I was almost always constantly reading. I always had a book with me. And so much so that when my grandmother did an embroidery thing of our family, all spread out around our last name, and each one of us was supposed to be embroidered in the picture doing something that would identify us forever. As that's who this is. I'm reading a book in that embroidery thing that my grandmother made. That's kind of when I started thinking myself as a reader. Prompt number 5 is, how has being a reader shaped your life and your worldview? Immeasurably. I wrote something out here, and what I would say is that in general, I feel like reading has expanded my life experiences. I experience things vicariously through the eyes of authors and characters who are fictional and real people in nonfiction. I've seen things through the author's eyes. I've seen things through characters' eyes. I felt things that didn't happen to me, experienced emotions that didn't happen to me, anger, sadness, joy. I've been places or feel like I've traveled to places that I will never go and have never been. I feel like I have experienced cultures that I will never be a part of. I learn things, just about the world and people and culture and language and history and food and you name it, just by reading, even just by reading fiction, which isn't trying to teach me these things, but because it's set in a time and a place among a certain group of people, you pick up and learn those things, and as a result, I think reading has expanded my worldview. It's expanded, not to go to 19 hippies LSD thing. It's expanded my mind. It's expanded my experiences, and it's been a real enrichment to my life. So as cheesy as that sounds, there it goes. Prompt number 6 is actually to tag people. I'm going to tag a few people. Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics, Leo from A Little Book Life, Courtney Ferriter, Jen from Remembered Reads, and Rhina from Rainier Books. I'd like to see your answers to those 5 prompts. And there you go. That is the Hindsight 2020 Reader Tag. Let me know what you think about my answers in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching.